React 19 is stable now and is out in the developer universe to consume and try out. That's why this playlist as well. So in this playlist, we have learned about what are the features React 19 offers, about React compiler, internals of it, and a React 19 form hook called useFormStatus. In useFormStatus, we understood like how the form status help us to manage different state of it. And also after the submission of the form, we can also get the data that gets submitted and can do a lot of stuff with that. Today, we'll continue our focus on the React 19 hooks, the thing that it is offering newly, and we're going to dive into another exceptionally important hook called useActionState. useActionState is a hook. It allows you to update the state of the component based on the result of a form action. Okay, confusing? It won't be. Stick to it, understand what it does. But before we get into anatomy of the hook, followed by examples and the project, let me tell you one interesting fact. Before React 19 became a stable release, it was in a canary. The use action state hook was known as use form state. So many of us might know the same hook in a different name called use form state, but now this particular hook has been renamed to use action state. What do you expect when you submit a form? Let's say you have a login form like the one you're seeing on the screen, and after filling up the form, you are clicking on signing in. So you have to send the user ID password to backend somewhere, and then you will do some kind of validation. You will see the authentication of the user, maybe authorization of the user, and then you'll get back with success or error thing. Let's say there is a server function, or we call server action, is running somewhere which is validating this user ID password, which is probably checking out the authentication aspect of it, the authorization aspect of it, whether the user belong to certain role, etc. And then it is signing in, or it is going to give you some kind of error message. Now in this scenario, you might want to do certain task. You might want to change your UI based on what is the result or the outcome of that server function or the action. So the form that you are submitting, along with submitting the form, you're also executing an action, right? You have the action attribute in the form. We'll see in the code in a while. Now, once that action attribute, whatever the function you're executing along with it, once that execution is done, based on the execution status, you want to change back the state of your component, maybe this login form, or if the login form is in another component, maybe that particular component, some state you want to change and you want to do something with it. One real use case that I can think of is about handling the success or the error based on the form submission or the action or the server function execution. Let's take the example of this login itself. If all the validation goes well and user successfully logged in, it's all good, but user is not able to log in means you want to give back an error, say your user ID or password doesn't match, or the user doesn't belong to our database, some kind of error message, right? Let's say that error validation and the message is being handled in the server function or the action, and it can return you the appropriate message. Now, once you get that particular message, with the use of this new hook, you can now manage a state for this error or the success in your component itself, in your form itself, so that you can show that messages appropriately. So that's why I think this particular hook is a great boon. Let's see things little bit deeper. First, let's understand the syntax of it. And when I looked into the syntax for the first time, I felt it is little complex, but it's not at all complex because we are going to see a project and the code right after that. All right, so let's look into the anatomy of the hook use action state. And I have marked or annotated it with number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because in that sequence, I want you to understand each of the parameters that this particular hook accepts and what it returns so that we can utilize that into our form or the component in which the form is there and do something that is more useful to our user. Okay, so first we are going to start with fn. The fn is marked with 1. This is fn. This is a function that should be called when we submit the form or a button pressed, that kind of situation. Now, when this function called, this particular function automatically receives the previous state value. When it is called for the first time, it receives the value that you pass in the initial state. So for example, if useActionState takes a function over here, this is nothing but the server action or the server function that I was talking about. It takes a parameter which is the previous state. If you pass initial state as null or 0, So first time it will get null, 0 or that kind of things. We'll see in the code. And along with the previous state, it will also receive whatever the values you are submitting from the form field. So if you have two fields, let's say username and password, it will also receive a form data with username and password's value. So this is what this function is. So the initial state is any state value that you think is acceptable for your application. If you don't have anything, you might want to initialize it with null, or if it is a primitive value, integer value might be with 0. If it's a boolean, might be with false. It's up to you. So far so good. 1 and 2 we have explained. Before we go to permalink, which is number 6, let us go to 3, 4, 5, where we'll come to know the return value of the useActionState hook and what we can do with the return value. The first is the current state. Now during the first render, when the component render for the first time, this value is equals to the initial state value. They are exactly same. If you pass 0 here, this state value is 0. If you pass null here, this state value is null. I hope you got it. Now after this action get invoked, what this value will be? It will be the return value of your action. Whatever your action or the server function return, once the form gets submitted, that value will be populated inside this state. So this is where it is really cool stuff, because every time this action gets executed, it is not only going to remember the old state value, but it will also return a new state value, current state value, which you can find inside this state. So far, so good. Now this form action is a new action. This is what you need to pass it to your form's action attribute. Okay, this is a new action that will be passing it to the form action attribute in your component. Or if you're using a button, in that case also, this is the action that you will be hooking into, not this one. This is your action that you would have defined in a different action file. You will import that, you will use it over here. You will initialize with the initial state, and then this form action is what you will be using in your form action attributes value. Is pending clearly tells is a flag that tells you whether there is a pending transition or not, whether form is being submitted or form is on the way of submission. So is pending is a boolean value which will return true if the form is not submitted yet. It will return false if the form submission, the transition is done. Very clear. Now the last but not the least, this permalink, which is an optional parameter to the useActionState, what it does, it usually contains a string, which is nothing but a unique page URL that this particular form that we are dealing with modifies. So let's say if this particular action or the server function that the form is submitting, it is being submitted before the JavaScript loads on your browser or the JavaScript bundle loads, then what browser will do? Browser in that time will navigate to this particular URL that you provide over here for permalink. For example, /intermediate or /feedback or /users, whatever the path that we define, right? And it will ensure not only it will go to that path, it will also ensure that the same component rendered on this particular page which we have defined over here and the state is being maintained. Once our JavaScript bundle loads and our form gets hydrated on the React side of it, then this parameter doesn't come into play. So this parameter is for the intermediate state that you have submitted this form well before your JavaScript bundle and everything gets loaded. So this intermediate time, you can give a string value which can match to a particular URL slug that can match to a particular page. And in that page, you can take the user, there the state also will be maintained. Once the JavaScript gets loaded, bundles get loaded, your component gets hydrated. After that, this particular guy doesn't have any impact. You are back to the actual component, actual form. So this is the usage of this permalink, but it's an optional. So I believe that you are quite clear about each aspect of useActionState, and I can also guess what you are thinking. Yes, we are getting into the code now. To demonstrate the useActionState hook, I have created a very simple application. So here is an application where you can enter a username and then you can enter a role and then you can add the user to the role. Ideally, you won't be creating an application like this. You must be having select box for both the user and the role to select from and then add to the role, right? But to keep things simple, this works. If I say enter a username, which is already existing in the role, and I say add, it's going to go for an adding. And here it is giving me an error saying that the user A tapas exists for the role user already. Can't add it again. Okay, fair enough. Now I'm going to try another user, say Tom1, I'm going to add it to a role called admin, which I know doesn't exist, and I'm going to add it. It added user Tom1 to the role admin successfully. Adding this user to the role, this particular action been taken care by a server action or a server function. If the action finds it that the user belong to a particular role already, it returns a error message saying that, hey, this is not possible. We have seen that in the UI. But if the user is not there in the role, then it sends a success message saying that, oh, I have added this user to the role. Now, once this message is received by the component, how it is received by the component? Through this hook we are talking about. Then we can do anything with this message. We can show it on the component, whatever the ways that we'd like to, right? So let's see the code. While I open up the file, let me tell you that if you like my teaching, please post a like to this video and let me know with your comment that what you like. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. That motivates a lot. All right. So let's get started seeing the action that we are talking about. Okay, first the server function. So I have created an action folder over here. Inside that there is an index.js file, and I have created a server function or the server action. Folks who are following me and following my Next.js series, I have a server function or the server action crash course. If you have seen that, you already know it. If you have not seen it, I have posted the link to that video in the description of this video. So let's understand this function. Here we have add user to role, the function, which of course gets a form data. And from form data, we extract out the username and the role that user would have inserted into the fields of that form. After getting the username and role, we are first checking, is this user found in role? I have a function which returns a true or false. If the user is found in role, so this username found in the role, in that case, I am throwing an error after a duration of 2 seconds, just to simulate there is an asynchronous call happening. I'm saying the user with the username exists for this role, so I cannot add it. In case the username doesn't belong to the role, I am returning a success message saying that I have added this user to this role. Okay, and I'm adding the user to the role, of course, before returning. So it's a very straightforward function. We just check for a particular user belong to a role or not. If it is not, then it adds that user to the role and send a success message. Otherwise, return a error message after a duration of couple of seconds. That's it. Now let's get into the form that I was talking about. I have the form over here, and let's understand the form first. So the form having a heading called H2. Then the first input box is for the username we have seen in the UI. The second one is for the role, and then I have a button, and this is a submit button. That's it. Nothing more than that. Very simple form. But the magic is about to start. What happened when I click on the submit button? The submit button will invoke an action that I have provided over here. The action equals to form action. This is what is going to get invoked. Now, what is this form action? This is where I have this useActionState, this particular hook used. So as we have seen in the anatomy, the useActionState takes two mandatory parameters. The first is the server action. The server action that we have seen just now, this is the server action add user to role. I have imported that here, add user to role, and this is my FN in that anatomy. Okay, this is what I have added over here. And initial state I have initialized with null. So in the first render, this message value, which is my state for this particular component, will be initialized with null. And then this useActionState also return a new action function, which is like form action. And by the definition of this hook, I should be passing this as a value of the action attribute. We have learned that in a moment ago. So I passed it over here. And it also returned me an is pending, which with its true and false value, I can determine whether form submission and the transition is already done or not. So taking this form action, I am now setting this as a value of the form's action attribute. But great part over here is this particular message will be populated by the return value of this particular action. This action is add user to role. This action's return value is either of this message. Either it's a error state or it's a success state. Based on the success of the error state, this message will be returned, and this message will be populated automatically using this particular message state. So now at the bottom, I can very well check, like if is pending is true, I can show a loading message, like something is loading. Otherwise, I can show this message itself. So if it is a failure case where I was doing a 2 seconds of delay before throwing the error message over here, For this 2 seconds until this return thing happens, pending value, the is pending will be true. So the form can show the loading over there. After the 2 seconds passed, I am returning an error message. So that means this message has been populated already and is pending already become false because the form transition and the action has already returned. So this message will display the actual message. Let's see the UI once more. That means the user database is there in the role user. If I add it, it will take 2 seconds delay. This time this loading is coming. After that, I'm getting the message. So this hook is fantastic, right? So this is the use case of this hook, use action state, which can help you to manage and maintain a state variable in your component based on what is the output you're getting from your action. That is the crux of it. This particular example can be enhanced a little bit. Let me show you that as well. Now, the same action, but I've changed the code little bit, the return part of it. Before, it was returning a single string, but now instead of returning a single string, I am returning an object. In case of a failure, that means where I cannot add the user to the role because the user already exists in the role, I am returning an object saying that the success is false because I was not able to add the user to the role. Along with that, the message, that same message like before. If I'm able to add the user to the role, in this case, the success is true and the message is almost same like before. So I have two different cases or two different states. In this case, instead of a string, I'm returning an object. Now, the advantage of this structured message returning from action and handling in the form using the hook is now instead of the message, I can tell this state as form state because inside that not only the message is there, but whether it's a success true or success false, that particular indicator is also there. So now I have modified my message portion is little bit. If it is pending, just show loading. If it is a success, show the success in the green color. If success is false, that means an error, show the error in the red color. So you have a plenty of control based on how you have structured your return value from your action, and based on the structured value now in your component, because the state is populated with that value, right? You can take the call. Now if the same application I run, let me again try Tapas in user. Now you will see loading is in gray and after some time it is in red because it failed and it is happening with that particular status error. Now if I add Tom to admin and say add, I'll immediately get it in green because I'm not doing any kind of fake async call over there. I'm adding it immediately. So is pending is becoming false. I'm able to see it in the green value because in this case, the success is true what my action is returning. And in the component, I'm checking that and putting the background color accordingly. One final thing before we end. In this action, there are two methods. One is user found in role and add user. I have not explained these two methods intentionally because my focus is explaining what this hook does, not a JavaScript function what it is doing. But if you are interested, both the functions I have written inside this lib user.js, where I have created a hard-coded user object with username and role. And you know, if it is an array, you can use the array methods to easily find out a particular user is there inside the role or not. And if it is not, you can actually create an object and push it to this particular user array to create a new user in memory. That is what it is doing. You can check out this portion of the JavaScript code if interested. Finally, let's talk about this prev state that our action is getting. When I explained in the anatomy of this hook, I told that the action you are passing the fn, you remember, that also gets something called a previous state. So this is another powerful thing is that in this action or in this server function, you are getting the previous state value as well, right? Whether it's a message or is a form state, you get the previous state value. So you can do anything that you would like to do with that. So that's the power that you have with you. Another thing, this is might be the problem that as a developer you might face. Usually in a server action or the server function, we tend to get only one argument, that is the form data. So you are very used to get only one argument form data like this. Now, while using this hook, if you are passing just form data as one argument to your server function, that will be something wrong because it expects always two arguments. The first one has to be the previous state and the form data will be always as the second argument. Please remember this because otherwise you might get a error saying that your form data is not found and if you're just passing one argument like this, even if you name it as form data, it is the previous state, and inside previous state you won't get your username and the role because it is available only inside the form data, and you have to pass this as a second argument only. Please remember this. So I hope this makes sense to you. If it does, please provide a like. Please provide a comment saying that you liked it. I'll be very happy. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask that. And please subscribe because that gives a lot of motivation. All the code that you have seen, you will find it in my GitHub, and the link is in the description of this video. Take care, keep learning. We'll be back again with another interesting video for you.